That's what, quote, conspiracy theory is the mainstream media and the dominant corporate culture. Anytime you say, hey, I think this bailout might not be a good idea, they've been calling that a conspiracy theory. Or, I think that we need to question government more or have more checks and balances, or there might be some corruption in government. They call it a conspiracy theory. So basically, anybody questioning the official paradigm is called a conspiracy theorist. And we've seen the same thing, going back to Galileo, when he said that the Earth was orbiting the sun, not the sun orbiting the Earth. They called him a heretic. And isn't that what's so suspicious about 9/11, is that you just ask questions and they stonewall and act so suspicious, Governor?
Well, and to me, that's the question we're going to try to pursue. Why, if what they've told us is true, then, there's that old quote, the truth will set you free. Well, why would you have any fear of telling the truth? Alex, I love to tell this story, if I may. When I was running for governor, and at the time it was very much in the early part where there were 6 or 7 candidates and they were holding debates throughout the state of Minnesota. We're much different than Texas, where in Texas you get 1 debate. Up in Minnesota, generally, you might get 12 to 13 of them. And when we were at this one particular debate early on, we were seated alphabetical, so naturally I'm over on the far side. And I'll never forget all the 7 or 8 other participants in the debate came in with stacks of papers and spin papers and all this stuff, and I sat down with nothing. And I remember there was a black woman, a civilian, sitting to my left, and she quietly handed over to me a legal pad and pen. And I looked at her and I handed it back and I said, no thanks. And she said to me, well, don't you think you'll need that? And I whispered back to her, I said, when you tell the truth, you don't have to have a good memory. And she looked at me and smiled and nodded. She fully understood what I just said to her. So in these debates, I didn't need all that stuff because, in essence, every question I was going to be asked, I would simply tell the truth. And if you do that, you don't need a good memory. And so that's what we're taking forward here. And people who will stonewall 9/11, well, why? If what you're saying is true, then simply tell the truth and let the chips fall where they may.
Well, Governor, take the new NIST report. They have now retracted their previous 5 reasons Building 7 fell, that 47-story structure, for those that don't know, that was hit by nothing that day. And they've retracted that it was bad building construction. They have retracted that a fuel oil tank blew up and did it. They have retracted that the North Tower fell and gouged out 25% of the south face of Building 7. And now they're saying a new phenomenon. This is like seeing a leprechaun in your backyard's a new phenomenon. Never before seen. Thermal expansion did this with 1,200, 1,500 degrees, cool fires, made it symmetrically fall. So they're just counting on the public, not looking at the evidence. And I'm here to tell everybody, and I want to get your take on this, the new NIST report has completely and totally backfired on them.
Well, the last report I saw, and correct me if I'm wrong, the last report I saw from them on Building 7 stated that they said that the fuel in the building, the diesel, was not responsible. They said the fire that destroyed the building was basically furniture and papers burning.
Yes, and they say it's never happened before.
That was their final line on the report that I saw. And Alex, I looked at it and started laughing. I thought, wait, how can they possibly? They're telling me that papers and furniture could cause a steel-structured, girdered building to uniformly collapse in 7 seconds. Alex, if that's the case, then what is being done? Because clearly, in that era of time, when that building was built, there were probably hundreds of others built throughout our country and the world. Shouldn't there be steps taken to ensure public safety if merely a fire with furnishings and paper can cause the total collapse of a 49-story skyscraper? What is being done about that?
Well, let me tell you, federal agencies then put out new guidelines in the last month telling them to build buildings differently, and major engineering firms and groups are now suing the federal government saying this isn't true, this isn't reality, and they're saying if this is the case, then a Bic lighter would be able to burn down a building, and we don't need controlled demolition companies anymore.
Well, and that's the truth. I said that from day one when I read this. I said, well, the way they can prove this to me is the next time a building has to fall or come down, let's simply go light it on fire. Let's not bother with any demo or any demolition professionals to come in. Let's simply light the building on fire, because certainly if furniture and paper can make a building completely collapse in 7 minutes, we don't need any demolition, do we, Alex?
Well, I want to get more into 9/11. Let's talk about, you told me that it was great meeting Karen Johnston out in Phoenix when you were there visiting, when you went to the 9/11 Truth event and spoke there. And then I love the video of the media trying to attack you, and you throw it right back at them and say, you explain it to me, because the official story doesn't answer any of the real questions. And even the 9/11 Commission says they weren't allowed to even do their job. So recap what your experience was like, really getting in with both feet into 9/11 Truth out in Arizona.
Well, I'll tell you, there's some dedicated people is the first thing I want to say. You know, Senator Karen Johnson, to me, shows tremendous courage, because she's a current elected official who is making no bones about the fact that she feels that the 9/11 investigation was completely botched, and that there certainly should be a second investigation done, even though at this point in time it would be exceptionally difficult, because there, as I stated earlier, there's no evidence. It's all been destroyed. So nobody can go there and get anything scientific, you know, it isn't made available to anybody. But the people out there are super dedicated people, and they're coming from all walks of life, which is the thing that I'm really noticing and that really makes me feel good. Not only do you have a strong group of young people whom you would expect. You know, I grew up in the 60s, so, you know, I know what it's like for young people to bolt from the status quo. I grew up in the generation that we used to say, don't trust anyone over 30. You know, I remember that famous quote. And, you know, so you've naturally got young people that are heavily involved. But then there were also professional people out there who are involved, people who you wouldn't expect to be involved, who have taken time and studied it a little bit. And I think that's really the thing that needs to happen in this country. We've got to break away. I had a guy the other day just look at me and smile, and he's at the golf club, and he said, I don't believe any of that conspiracy stuff. And I looked at him and I said, well, what knowledge do you actually have? What have you done to study it at all? Are you simply going on what the television has told you and what the government has told you, and you just blindly accept that today? And this guy was a Vietnam veteran, Alex. I would expect him to be a little bit more cynical, you know, in light of the fact they've now revealed the Gulf of Tonkin incident never happened, and, you know, in the fraudulent whole Vietnam War.
Well, the NSA...
How we wouldn't allow elections in Vietnam because they knew Ho Chi Minh would win them, you know, and things of that nature. And so, you know, and it irks me that the public is so, they don't want to, maybe it's because they don't want to believe anything else, but that isn't the attitude to have, and that's not going to do us any good, because, you know, you can stick your hole in the head, but it doesn't mean things are going to go away and they're going to be right. The only way that happens is by people being involved, paying attention, and doing a little detective work on their own, and understanding that you cannot trust the mainstream media today, and you cannot trust our government today.
Absolutely, and it's the denial that there could be corruption or there could be a problem that has allowed the corruption to take over. History shows you're always going to have corrupt groups and criminal organizations and elites trying to take over and set up empires and abuse the average person's rights and liberty and property. And so to deny that any of that exists in history or in this country is the greatest folly, and we're about to reap the whirlwind on that front.
Let me throw this out for a minute. The other thing I find so mind-boggling in this whole affair of 9/11 is the fact that we will so quickly believe that 19 Islamic radicals with box cutters could do what happened that day, but we totally throw out that us on the Christian side could never do something like that.
There are so many facets to it, but some of the areas that they can't ignore is the White House lying and saying we never heard of plans to fly planes into buildings, when there'd been hundreds of government drills and plans, and they'd even had Operation Bojinka and other cases where things like this had developed. We also have the war games that morning, just like on 7.
What gets me the most, Alex, is when I watch Condoleezza Rice testify and state we had no idea they would take planes and use them as missiles into buildings. And then you find out that, yes, they did. They even had, as you said, practice things that had happened within the government. And what would they do? How can they sit back and look at us and say they were so naive that they didn't have any idea that this type of situation could happen? It insults my intelligence, Alex.